Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a topic that is, well, it's as challenging as it is necessary. We're exploring the absolute worst extremes of human criminality.
And we're really trying to understand how this kind of profound evil manages to hide in plain sight.
Exactly. So our mission today is to synthesize some really dense source material that deals with the psychopath and what the source calls the savage. We want to draw out the critical differences in their methods.
Right. We've been immersed in some deep analysis here, focusing on interviews, official documents, and expert commentary around two deeply contrasting case studies.
And the goal is to get past the sensationalism.
For sure. It's about establishing a psychological framework that comes directly from the source material. And that framework it's vital. It determines how we even begin to categorize these individuals.
Okay, so let's unpack that critical distinction right from the get-go. The source material draws a very sharp line between the clinically defined psychopath and what it terms the savage. What is the fundamental difference in the source's eyes?
It really centers on culpability and control. The psychopath is typically viewed through a neurological or clinical lens.
So things like the PCLR, the psychopathy checklist.
Exactly, that's the tool. It suggests their condition is inherent, maybe tied to, dysfunctional brain wiring, a lack of conscience that's essentially, it's seen as a condition beyond their immediate conscious control.
And the source material says this sometimes provides a kind of twisted excuse.
It does. It acknowledges that the clinical view can sometimes be interpreted that way, even if the condition itself is horrific.
How is that different?
The savage, according to this material, is defined by something else entirely. They exhibit this brutal, unrestrained violence, but, and this is the key, it's coupled with a profound and willful transgression of society's laws.
Willful, so it's a choice.
It's a choice. The source explicitly states the savage has no such excuse. They do the rules, they have the behavioral control, and they deliberately choose this kind of animalistic disregard for morality and law.
So, to put it simply, the psychopath is maybe like a machine that's broken internally, driven by compulsion or a lack of emotion. Whereas the savage is a fully functioning machine that chooses to destroy. They're making calculated decisions to violate every single boundary.
That's a perfect summary, precisely. Both are monumentally destructive, but the savage's actions are rooted in this conscious, relentless pursuit of self-interest through fraud, cruelty, and just pure deceit. The level of calculated control is what differentiates them.
That clarity is essential. Okay, let's jump right into our first case study, which really epitomizes that cruel, controlling psychopath. Kenneth Allen McDuff, also known as Big Mac.
Yeah, the McDuff case it's a chilling illustration of what happens when a system just completely fails to recognize the gravity of psychopathy.
And his history starts way before his final capture.
Oh, yeah. He was involved in petty crimes, robberies with his brother Lonnie, but that escalated dramatically into the horrific 1966 triple murder.
Right. The 1966 crime, the murder of two schoolboys and a young woman, Edna Louise Sullivan, was horrific enough that you'd think it meant life behind bars. At least.
You would think.
But here's the jaw-dropping fact that says so much about the system at the time. McDuff was paroled.
He was paroled after serving just 9 months and 2 weeks for those murders.
9 months.
Released on December 29, 1965. This wasn't some minor oversight. This is a catastrophic systemic failure that put a proven, escalating killer right back on the streets of Texas.
Just before he committed his most brutal crimes.
Exactly. The source material spends a lot of time analyzing how that early release basically confirmed the system just. You couldn't see the threat that was right there.
And once he was back out, his methodology became not just deadly, but purely sadistic. He returned to killing, and the violence just escalated frighteningly.
There's a quote in the source from Sheriff Larry Pamplin, as it's haunting. He said, McDuff didn't just kill his victims, he savaged them in unspeakable ways.
And the methods detailed in the source they're deeply disturbing.
They are. They reinforce that complete psychopathic lack of empathy where victims are just objects. We're talking about systematic sexual assault, stabbing, bludgeoning.
And that horrific detail about crushing a victim's neck with a broomstick.
The sheer brutality confirms this parasitic and predatory nature of his actions. This wasn't about necessity for him. It was about the experience of dominance, the experience of control.
The case that really haunted investigators for years was that of Regina Deanne Moore, Tina. She was abducted and killed in 1991 near Waco, Texas. She was only 17.
Yeah, and the aftermath of that specific crime really highlights the cold, calculated manipulation that is the hallmark of that psychopathic drive for control.
She was hogtied with pantyhose.
And her body wasn't found for 7 years. It was finally discovered in 1998 in a sinkhole. And you have to remember, her mother, Barbara Carpenter, spent those 7 years desperately searching, literally digging up dirt roads, just begging for closure.
And McDuff withholding that information, that's a tactic of control.
It's the ultimate tactic, the calculated denial of closure.
That denial of dignity is it's a crucial part of this. And we have to mention the other victims, like Brenda K. Thompson, who the source describes as a 2-star hooker, and Melissa Northrup,
whose body was found in a gravel pit, tied with shoestrings. He was methodical. He preyed on the vulnerable.
Absolutely. And then his capture, it's almost jarringly mundane, isn't it?
It is. He was arrested in Kansas City using a stolen ID, posing as a Richard Fowler. And he was working a simple sanitation job. It just reinforces that idea that these individuals can function in society.
Yeah.
They maintain that facade of normalcy right up until the compulsion. The need for power and control just forces them to act.
But when the author of our source material finally got access to him, that facade just cracked. It exposed the core of it all, manipulation and control.
Textbook. So what specific traits did McDuff exhibit that, align with that PCLR checklist we mentioned?
He was the poster child for a high-scoring psychopath. The sources note his smugness, his cockiness, his overconfidence. These align perfectly with PCL items 2, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, can we just quickly define those for anyone listening?
Of course. So item 2 is a grandiose sense of self-worth. Item 6 is lack of remorse or guilt. Item 7 is callousness or a lack of empathy. And item 8 is shallow affect, which is emotional superficiality. McDuff wasn't interested in redemption. He was only interested in exploiting the interaction for his own gain.
And he proved that by attempting outright extortion.
He did. He demanded $500 be given to his mother, Addie McDuff, for his treatment, he said. And in exchange, he'd give up the location of Virginia Moore's body.
The line he used, "I'll give you that bitch more," is just bone-chilling. What does that exchange really tell us about his psychological state?
It's the definition of parasitic and callous behavior. He viewed a victim's body, the source of unimaginable grief for a family, as just a commodity, a bargaining chip for a measly $500.
And he didn't even want the money himself. He used his mother as the go-between.
Right, which adds another twisted layer. He's leveraging emotion, maybe trying to imply some kind of humanity or need, when really it was just another cold transaction.
Speaking of his mother, Addie, the pistol-packing mama, as she was called, she's such a tragic figure in this whole story.
She is. She was known to have bribed officials before, even Sheriff Pamplin, to help her son. And she just maintained this unwavering belief in his innocence despite everything.
And the source material suggests that kind of profound denial is common in families of high-end psychopaths.
Very common. She told the author she couldn't take the $500 in cash, but she'd sign a receipt to help her son get treatment. It shows she was still completely locked into supporting his facade. It's a sad testament to the power of a manipulator.
So let's pivot to the interrogation, the final confrontation. It's detailed extensively in the source. How do you interrogate a man with no conscience? You can't appeal to guilt.
You can't. So the author had to use extreme psychological pressure. The strategy was specifically calculated to attack his primary weakness, his need for control and his grandiose self-image.
What was the first step?
The first step was the strategic use of emotion. The author brought up the tearful plea of Virginia Moore's mother, Barbara Carpenter, she just needed to know where her daughter was.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this wouldn't affect McDuff's emotions, of course,
Right.
but it introduced the reality of external moral judgment into his controlled world.
But the real leverage, the thing that actually broke him, was the knowledge of his secrets.
Exactly. The author confronted McDuff with specific, damaging information about his vulnerabilities. This included his deep personal hatred for Sheriff Pamplin, an authority figure he desperately wanted to feel superior to.
And the confessions of his accomplices.
Right, notably a guy named Roy Dale Green. The moment McDuff realized the author knew about Green, knew about Pamplin, he understood that his narrative, his carefully constructed perception of himself as the mastermind, was gone. It was lost.
So it was a direct strike at that item, too, the grandiose sense of self-worth. That must have been debilitating for him.
It was devastating. He realized he was no longer dictating the terms. He was being dictated to. The great manipulator McDuff lost control so completely that the conversation it couldn't continue.
He became physically enraged.
To the point he had to be electronically stunned by the guards before they could drag him back to his cell. That violent outburst, that total loss of composure, was the ultimate sign of defeat for a psychopath whose entire existence is built on maintaining total control.
It's an incredible, visceral look into the moment a psychopath's mask just shatters. His cruelty was monumental, but the engine driving it all was just maintaining control and defending his inflated status.
And that status, whether he was Big Mac on the streets or the death row bigwig in prison, that was his lifeblood. You take away the control, you take away his identity. That's the psychopathic blueprint we see in the McDuff case.
Okay, now we're going to shift gears completely. While McDuff's path was driven by control and sadism, our next subject, John J.R. Robinson, operated on a foundation of pure, relentless fraud, a conscious, calculated disregard for human rules.
Which is precisely why the source material applies the label of the savage to him.
J.R. Robinson perfected the mask to an almost unbelievable degree.
Oh, he did. The source details what the author calls his plinth, this staggering list of fraudulent accomplishments he used to present himself to the world.
The list. I mean, it reads like something out of a bad movie, but he convinced people it was real. He claimed to be an Eagle Scout leader of 120 scouts.
Said he met Queen Elizabeth II in 1957 at the London Palladium.
Right. Happily married for 41 years, a director at Mobile named Kansas City Man of the Year, and a high-level consultant to medical and charitable ventures. I mean, if you were looking for a pillar of the community, this is the guy you'd point to.
And this immediately signals that savage reality underneath. The source material highlights that almost all of this impressive biography, was fabricated. It's a textbook manifestation of specific traits that lead to this kind of savage behavior.
The PCLR items again.
Exactly. We're looking at items 1, 4, 5, 9, and 15, the ones most related to calculated deception and a parasitic lifestyle.
Okay, let's quickly define those in the context of Robinson's fraud, because they are crucial to understanding his nature.
For sure. So item 1 is glibness and superficial charm. Item 4 is pathological lying. Item 5 is cunning and manipulative. Item 9, parasitic lifestyle. And item 15 is promiscuous sexual behavior. Robinson weaponized every single one.
For example, he wasn't a stellar student?
Not at all. He was denied sophomore admission to a prep seminary because of, and this is a quote, academic and behavioral shortcomings. He was a fraudster from the very beginning.
And the happily married facade was just a sickening lie. His wife, Nancy, eventually discovered the horrific truth.
That he had murdered 7 women and was stuffing their remains into steel barrels. She later testified that he never did an honest day's work in their entire 41 years of marriage, an entire life built on deception.
And the depth of his transgression, his savagery, it's just profound. He wasn't just a serial killer and a fraud.
No. He committed the ultimate betrayal. He stole one of his victim's babies, and then he sold that infant to his own brother for $3,000 using phony adoption papers he had meticulously forged.
That calculation, turning an innocent baby's life into a quick financial transaction, that's where the definition of the savage really finds its full expression.
It is. And the financial fraud, it wasn't a side hustle, it was his main gig.
He embezzled $33,000 from Dr. Wallace Graham, President Truman's personal physician.
And another $40,000 from Mobile. His financial crimes were so pervasive he was eventually barred for life by the SEC.
And yet, he still managed to snag the title of Kansas City Man of the Year.
Which is just the most delicious example of his hubris, isn't it? The source material reveals he manufactured that award himself. He wrote and submitted fake letters of commendation.
And this is where that savageness, that over-the-top confidence becomes sloppy.
It does. He actually misspelled one of the city fathers' names on a fake letter he forged. It just shows a man so convinced of his own genius that he overlooks the most obvious details.
This feeds directly into the source's definition of the modern savage, combining great violence with an animalistic disregard for any rules of human behavior.
And J.R.'s hunting ground was perfectly tailored to exploit this. He used the dark corners of the internet, specifically trawling BDSM sites, to find his victims.
An intentional choice to find vulnerable people.
Exactly. People he could exploit sexually, emotionally, and most importantly, financially. He lured them with these elaborate promises of jobs, travel, investments, playing that high-status director he pretended to be.
The Kansas Supreme Court actually weighed in on his methodology, and the language they used really aligns with the source's definition, doesn't it?
It does, yes. The court noted his systematic use of deception, the phony letters, the emails sent to victims' friends and family to hide what he'd done, as part of the overall brutality. It highlights that willful transgression. He didn't just impulsively kill, he set up these elaborate, calculated traps.
He made a conscious choice to break every moral and legal rule for his own personal gain.
That's why he's labeled a savage, not just a standard psychopath.
And just like McDuff, Robinson saw the author as nothing more than a resource to be exploited during the book process.
Oh, absolutely. His demands were pure grandiosity. Initially, he demanded, what, $500 for the easily verifiable Eagle Scout story? A small fee for a small lie.
But his demands quickly ballooned.
They did. He started insisting the author fund a full investigation into his case, demanding $400,000. He claimed he was innocent, even though he'd already pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He even tried to pitch a collaboration on a BTK true crime book, with him as the expert.
That is just magnificent ego. He saw the book as his next great scam, a vehicle for fame and financial rehab.
And he even requested $5,000 a week for his able researcher, a Miss whoever. It was classic game player behavior. He was addicted to the spotlight, addicted to the transaction.
Which brings us to the counter-manipulation strategy. The author worked with Professor Annabelle Lay, an FBI supervisory special agent. They had to fight fire with fire.
They did. They had to flip the script on a master manipulator.
How did they do it?
They targeted his two primary weaknesses, his vanity, his ego, and his sexual perversions. Professor Lee employed a honey trap. She engaged with him using a BDSM lure, even signing a slave contract she found online.
Playing directly into his desire for dominance and control.
Exactly. It kept him engaged. And at the same time, the author played the financial game, appealing to his exaggerated ego and the lure of this huge financial gain, feeding his delusion that he could control the narrative and become a celebrity from prison.
His vanity was just overwhelming. There's that quote from a former probation officer in the source.
Right. J.R. loved mirrors. He spent half of his life admiring himself and polishing his act. Robinson wasn't driven by sadism like McDuff. He was driven by an aggressive, all-consuming narcissism that required constant validation.
And the sheer meticulousness of his fraud-forging documents, notary signatures, even a judge for the baby adoption.
Only to be exposed by a misspelled name on a fake letter for a vanity award. It just shows that arrogance is the downfall of the savage. He was brilliant at creating the illusion of competence, but his overwhelming belief in his own superiority meant he always cut corners, confident that no one would dare question the Kansas City Man of the Year.
So we've dissected McDuff, the cruel, controlling psychopath, and Robinson, the ruthlessly fraudulent savage. Both operated behind these astonishingly convincing masks. Which brings us to the central and maybe the most unnerving quality of this deep dive.
Could a normal person, could you, listening right now, have spotted these monsters before it was too late?
And the sources are, well, they're overwhelmingly clear on this.
They are. It is nearly impossible for the average person to spot a homicidal psychopath or savage. And the reason for this impossibility is rooted in the source's concept of the bubble world.
The bubble world phenomenon. Can you tell us more about that?
It's the protective sphere of social trust that we all live in. We just don't operate assuming the people around us are actively malicious or murderous. We assume a basic level of civility and shared moral rules.
You don't consult the PCLR checklist before you hire a new doctor or start dating someone.
Exactly. Victims only discover the truth when that mask finally comes off. And by then, as the source says, it is far too late.
And the source uses some extremely high-profile figures to illustrate just how effective this mask of sanity is, even among professionals. The case of Jimmy Savile is it's incredibly disturbing in this context.
Savile wasn't just a celebrity. He was a national institution. He was knighted. He raised an estimated 40 million pounds for charity. He was the absolute epitome of public trust.
And yet the source notes he was given complete and unfettered access to children's wards at major hospitals like Broadmoor and Leeds General Infirmary.
The level of institutional trust was absolute. And despite allegations and rumors during his lifetime, which were all dismissed because it just seemed so implausible that Sir Jimmy could be a monster, no one acted.
And the police later linked him to approximately 300 victims, ages 5 to 75.
So, if people working daily in a hospital, if security and vetting services can't spot a predator operating in such a prominent, high-access environment, what hope does the general public have? The mask was impenetrable because his public persona was so polished.
The source also uses the example of Rolf Harris. He was commissioned to paint Queen Elizabeth II's official portrait. He underwent a level of scrutiny and vetting that few citizens ever face.
And yet, he was later jailed for 12 counts of indecent assault. The system, the media, professional proximity, it all failed to flag what was lying just beneath the surface. This is the ultimate problem. The high-functioning psychopathic mind is designed to be undetected.
So we circle back to the core nature of psychopathy. If they don't have delusions, no hallucinations, they're well anchored in reality. How do they appear so normal at first glance?
There's a great observation from a Dr. Martin Blinder. He says, the psychopath at first glance seems quite well put together. Their intelligence is often high. We saw this with serial killer Michael Ross, who had an IQ of 150.
Their defects aren't clinical insanity then, they're behavioral.
Exactly. An inability to conform to social norms, defer gratification, or control impulses. But they hide all of this behind their glibness, their superficial charm, and that consistent lack of remorse. The classic mask of sanity.
Michael Ross, another psychopathic manipulator, was described by a journalist as looking like the all-American boy, someone living next door to you. His only fear, like McDuff, was losing control.
That drive for control is paramount for the psychopath. They are performing their sanity at all times.
So, if pure, high-functioning psychopathy is virtually impossible for a layperson to detect, what specific, observable trait does the source material suggest we should look for? Where are the practical red flags?
The source posits that while you can't diagnose clinical psychopathy, you can look for aggressive narcissism. This personality trait is often easier to spot and frequently acts as a kind of camouflage or a precursor, a metamorphosing psychopathy of sorts.
What are the tangible warning signs of that aggressive narcissism? The things a shrewd observer should look for in a relationship?
We're talking about clear, obvious red flags. Unfounded jealousy, unreasonable attempts at control, and consistent, blatant lying. These were seen all over the way J.R. Robinson operated. Aggressive narcissists rely on external validation to maintain their fragile self-image.
There's an analysis from Dr. Alice Miller on the grandiose narcissist that really brings this home. She highlighted that these individuals are never truly free. Why is that?
Because they depend excessively on admiration from others. Their self-respect is entirely externalized. It hangs precariously on qualities, wealth, status, power, charm that are external and can sail at any moment. When that facade of perfection starts to crumble, the aggression and volatility can be catastrophic.
That need for external validation explains both McDuff and Robinson perfectly. McDuff needed the control and status of the bigwig on death row. Robinson needed the title of Man of the Year.
Exactly. They use a defense mechanism called splitting. They merge their inflated ideal self, the powerful, charming person, with the terrifying reality of their actual self, which they see as weak or deficient. This internal conflict makes them desperate for external admiration.
So when Robinson demanded $400,000 for a full investigation, he wasn't just trying to scam the author.
No, he was trying to force the author to participate in and validate his self-aggrandizing narrative of innocence. He was trying to co-opt the book's authority to maintain his idealized self-image. We see the same thing with Kenneth Bianchi, pretending to be Dr. Bianchi with fake diplomas. They must be admired for something they are not.
And the common thread linking both the psychopath and the savage is their profound willingness to use, discard, and annihilate people without a single shred of guilt or remorse.
And the source material is very clear. Psychopaths are often viewed as clinically incurable. Savages cannot be tamed because their brutality is a choice. The point of this deep dive isn't to generate fear, but to foster understanding, to reinforce our knowledge of the darkness so we can better spot the warning signs that are visible.
Which brings us to the final conclusion from the source, which is drawn from the wisdom tradition of Proverbs.
Right. Proverbs 14, verses 15 and 16, the passage states, "The naive person believes every word, but the shrewd one ponders each step. The wise one is cautious and turns away from evil, but the stupid one is reckless and overconfident."
That is the ultimate lesson from the source material. It's about self-awareness, not paranoia. We've contrasted McDuff, whose unspeakable cruelty was driven by this clinical, almost robotic need for control, with Robinson, whose life was defined by aggressive narcissism, fraud, and a cold, willful abandonment of every social rule. The mask of normalcy is often too polished to penetrate.
But the cracks, the signs of aggressive narcissism, those are visible to the shrewd observer.
And that shrewdness is our most effective self-defense. Despite the horrors we've discussed, the vast majority of people live healthy, honest lives.
For sure. But understanding the overt traits of aggressive narcissism, that excessive need for admiration, the unfounded jealousy, the blatant deceit, that is the most practical tool available. If you see those characteristics, even if they're wrapped in superficial charm, the shrewd one ponders each step. You realize that those initial red flags might just conceal a far more destructive mind.
A truly practical and sobering way to end this discussion. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the minds of the master manipulators.